Valentin Dragnev of Austria is waiting for Magnus Carlsen to arrive. It's the 7th round of the Chess Olympiad 2024, and there we have Magnus Carlsen of Norway coming in. He shakes hands. He's 8 minutes late to the game, but that's fine for Magnus. One of the reasons why he also comes late to the games is to avoid a lot of people swarming him before the round, and he wants to straight on get on with the game and be in that mindset. He writes down his score sheet, calms himself down, and this is what Magnus always does. Even when he's late, he takes his time to get into the groove and not hurry up, because that could make him go wrong right at the start of the game. He looks a bit at the games of his teammates. Dragnev has already opened the game with 1 e4, and let's see what Magnus responds back with. He adjusts all his pieces and goes d6. Interesting. Is Magnus going to go for the perk defense or the Philidor or the modern? Let's see what happens here. d4 played here by Dragnev, taking up the center, and Magnus goes knight f6. It's important for Magnus to get a playable position where his opponent is not just blitzing out opening moves, and that's why he's chosen this e5. Now it's very dangerous to go into an end game with Magnus like this, and I believe that's not the best way for white to continue. So knight f3 is played, which is supposed to be the main line, and then knight comes out to d7, just solidifying the center, putting the knight on a good square. Bishop c4. The bishop is developed on the most important diagonal here, and now generally black continues with a developing move, bishop e7. So it's a very modest way of playing the opening for black. His pieces are all quite passive, but on the other hand, it's a very solid way to play because you have a pawn in the center on e5 and you are just sticking to it. Black also castles here, and let's see how Dragnev continues now. He plays a4, gaining some space on the queen side, also creating a space for the bishop here to go back to a2. And now Magnus plays his pawn to c6. This is a useful move because you can play your queen to c7, and in general quite a decent move. h3 played here by Dragnev. White would like to play bishop e3, but then there are knight g4 possibilities, and that's why h3 stops all of that. h6 played by Magnus, and this is against the fact that you want to play rook e8, but then knight g5 would be quite an irritating move. Bishop e3 played, and now black can actually go a5 at any moment, but Magnus has chosen not to go for it. He goes rook e8, and a common plan in such positions is queen c7, knight f8, knight g6, and trying to slowly unravel. Then the bishop goes back, this bishop opens up. a5 played by Dragnev. He wants to maybe even push forward with a6, but this move just gains a lot of space. So now queen c7 is possible, just continuing normally, but Magnus can also take on d4, and he does it. He takes on d4 here, and all three recaptures with the bishop, queen and the knight are fine. Let's see what Dragnev does. If he takes with the knight, then bishop f8, and there's a lot of pressure on this e4 pawn. So queen d4 has been played here, and Magnus plays his bishop back to f8. Yes, the d6 pawn is a bit weak, but at the same time the e4 pawn is also under pressure. Dragnev that's why plays rook f e1, a useful move. Next move he can go bishop f4, putting pressure here, and I think black can just play queen c7. Yes, that's a useful move to make. Queen to c7. And now bishop to f4, putting pressure on the d6 pawn. There is pressure from the queen, the bishop, and the rook would come in further. Knight e5 played, attacking the knight and also the bishop. Now if you take knight e5, d5, you lose a piece. So that's the reason why Dragnev plays the best move, bishop e2. And for Magnus now, it's not so easy to come up with the next move. He plays bishop d7. This is useful because at some point you want to play c5 and you want to control the b5 square. Your bishop can then pop out via c6. So it's useful there. Bishop comes back to g3, and maybe the bishop can pop out to h4. But in general, a useful move to play. And now Magnus plays a6, just in case if he moves the rook, he doesn't want the pawn to be hanging here. It's a slow maneuvering struggle, and now knight d2 with the idea of f4 would be very good. But Valentin plays bishop h4, wanting to attack the knight. And Magnus defends it with rook to e6. Knight d2 still seems like a good idea to free up the f4 pawn, but he takes. Now this is a very committal move. The point that Dragnev wants to make is that after takes, he can come back to e3, but he can also go here, and then bishop c4 would be coming. So Magnus takes with the rook. This is the first very unusual decision, because Magnus is okay with his pawn structure being ruined because he's attacking a5 and threatening f5. Dragnev doesn't take. He plays b4. Very interesting decision here by Dragnev. He did not take the knight and mangle up Magnus's structure, and Magnus is still okay with white taking on f6, and so goes rook e8. Maybe it's a good idea to take here, but he comes back to g3, and this is a big error. Now Magnus has a very strong move, because look, if you go rook e7 back, the d6 pawn hangs. If you go back to e6, there's bishop c4. But the move c5 is a brilliant move here, because after take here, I'm going to take with the rook. And so he goes back with the queen, hoping for the rook to move, but Magnus has no real intention of that. C takes b4, and now when the exchange is captured, I think Magnus can just take back with the pawn and be exchanged down, but improve the structure. He's already gotten a pawn here. Magnus showing some great understanding of the dynamics in the position now. Knight d5 played by Dragnev. He's attacking the queen and also the knight, so the knight must take back on d5. So knight takes d5, and white will take e takes d5. And how should we continue here is the main question for black. Bishop f5 looks really interesting, putting pressure here. So is bishop d6. Magnus plays the best move once again, pushes his pawn to e4, just activating this entire diagonal here. Bishop g4 played, offering a trade of bishops, but it's a very interesting move. Dragnev is actually provoking Magnus to go f5, and I think Magnus will take the bait. He plays f5, limiting the bishop. The bishop goes to h5 now, putting pressure here. And can we go rook c8 or rook d8? There's also rook e5. Magnus starts to think here. He's an exchange down, but he has great compensation. He goes rook to c8. A very interesting move now for Carlsen is to play d6. So for Dragnev is to play d6. Because if bishop d6, you have queen d5 check. And if queen d6, you can take, bishop takes, and bring your rook into the game in the center. He pushes it. Great chess there by Dragnev. Bishop d6, there's queen d5 check, and if queen d6, you can take and bring your rook in, and white is doing fine. So he plays queen c5 here, Magnus, and he plays c3. A little too ambitious here, I guess. Queen d2 much better, but he plays c3 with the idea of getting the queen on this diagonal. Magnus chops off the pawn. He's like, thank you so much for the material. Now the c pawn is going to be extra strong here. Valentin plays a check, and he wants to take this pawn on b7. So can go king h8, but queen b7 is hanging. Plays queen c4. I like this move because if queen takes queen, rook takes, black is completely winning. So he takes the pawn on b7 and asks the question to this bishop. Where are you going? If the bishop moves, then you have d7. So Magnus brings back the queen. Very nice move, defending the bishop. Yes, you will lose the a6 pawn now, which is what is happening. And you can see that in a full-fledged fight, Magnus is not rushing to gain back material. He just believes in his pawn, in the position of his pieces. Yes, bishop takes d6 found, and now the threat is bishop h2 check, winning the queen. This is the massive threat here. So queen a7 played, keeping the queen actively positioned, but actually there is no real threat as of now. And he plays his pawn to c2. If rook c1 now, trying to go after the pawn, there's bishop f4. So he plays a6. Dragnev is like, this pawn is not running anywhere, but now it is. There is a threat to play c1 queen and win an entire rook. And let's see how things continue. Queen b7. Interesting. If you make a queen, I take, you take, and I have my a pawn running here. So there the care has to be taken very much. Rook b8 found by Magnus. Wow, what a move. This is just the brilliant move there. If you play a7, I take, you make a queen, I just come back and I'm winning. So he plays queen a7 back. And now this very beautiful move, queen d6. Just staying there, kind of dominating the white pieces. He comes back, and once again there's no killer blow as such right now. You don't want to be giving away your c2 pawn so cheaply. So bishop e6, just improving the position. White has very little that he can do. Bishop f1. How do you improve your position even further without creating any threats? Well, Magnus is an expert at this. Plays king h7. Just seeing that white can't do a thing because all the squares on the last rank for the rooks are covered. Finally, Dragnev sacrifices an exchange because he doesn't see a way forward. It's like all his pieces are completely dominated. Bishop c1, rook c1. If you see, the queen has no square to go to anywhere. Wow. And now Magnus goes rook b1. Very classy move. If you take on c2, I have check, takes, and queen d1 mate. So that's the reason why you can't take on c2. Rook b1. And he comes back queen e3. And queen to d1 played here. Beautiful move. If you take the queen, I make a queen. There's no other move left. Maybe to push the pawn forward, but that doesn't seem to work because after queen c1, I'm still threatening rook f1. So a7 played. And I think Magnus can play rook c1, queen c1. All of it is winning. He looks in the distance, tries to calculate, plays queen c1 here, and the problem is f1 is hanging, and if you take and make a queen here, I have rook takes f1 and make a queen, and I'm a piece up. So that's the reason why here after queen c1 Magnus gets up and looks at the games of his other teammates. He's hoping that Norway does well. Dragnev is looking at the other boards, but there's nothing much left in his own game now. Magnus has completely outplayed him with beautiful exchange sacrifice and understanding of the key squares of the position, dominating his opponent's pieces. And Dragnev, with a smile on his face, resigns there. A beautiful game by Magnus, a pat on the back from the coach of the team. And now Norway managed to beat Austria because of this win. And here Christiansen on board 2-1 and also Urkedel on the last board 1. So 3-1 victory for Magnus, but this was a very, very instructive game by Magnus Carlsen, showing his class, showing his understanding of material and dynamics in chess.